The parents left with a quick wave and a warning about the old house's quirks. But it wasn't the creaking floors or the drafty windows that unsettled me. It was the feeling that the little girl I was babysitting wasn't the only child in the house, and the whispers that started coming from the empty playroom. My name is Sarah, and I was 17, a seasoned babysitter in a quiet, suburban town just outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'd been watching kids since I was 13, dealt with everything from tantrums to scraped knees, and considered myself unshakable. This particular gig was for the Millers, a new family in town who lived in a sprawling, older house on the edge of a wooded cul-de-sac. Their daughter, Lily, was 5, a sweet, imaginative child with wide, innocent eyes. The house itself was a classic Victorian with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and an undeniable sense of history. It was the kind of place that always felt a bit cooler indoors than out, even in summer. Mrs. Miller had rattled off a list of instructions, bedtime routines, snack preferences, and a casual mention of the house settling if I heard any strange noises. I nodded, accustomed to old houses having their quirks. I was a rational teenager, focused on my studies and my future, not prone to believing in ghosts or fairy tales. This was just another night. Another few hours of easy money. The first hint of something wrong was during Lily's bedtime story. We were in her brightly decorated bedroom, and as I read from a picture book, Lily suddenly pointed to a darkened corner of the room. "He's there again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who's there, sweetie?" I asked, looking at the empty corner, a smile on my face. "The tall man," she replied, her eyes wide. "He's watching us." I brushed it off, a child's active imagination. But then, as I continued reading, I felt a distinct, icy coldness wash over that corner of the room, sending a shiver down my spine. Later, after Lily was asleep, I went downstairs to watch TV. That's when I noticed it, a small, antique porcelain doll, not one of Lily's toys, sitting upright on the armrest of the armchair opposite me. I was certain it hadn't been there when I arrived. It had pale, cracked features and unsettlingly realistic glass eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. I placed it back on a decorative shelf, attributing it to Mrs. Miller's decor. But then, the whispers began. Faint, indistinct murmurs, like dry leaves, skittering across the floor, coming from the closed door of the playroom down the hall. I paused the TV, strained my ears. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old house. I dismissed it as drafts or my mind playing tricks. The rising action was a slow, terrifying unraveling of the house's normalcy. The whispers from the playroom grew clearer, sometimes sounding like children's voices, hushed and urgent, sometimes like a mournful lullaby. They would stop abruptly whenever I approached the door, only to resume once I retreated. Lily, when she woke up for a glass of water, mentioned them again. "The other children are playing in the playroom," she said sleepily. "They get loud sometimes." My blood ran cold. I knew Lily was an only child. The antique doll reappeared, not just once, but multiple times, always in a different prominent location, on the kitchen counter, on the piano, staring at me from the top of the stairs. Each time I moved it, it felt colder, heavier, its glass eyes seeming to follow my movements. The tall man Lily mentioned became a shadow in my peripheral vision, a fleeting, gaunt form, darting across doorways, just beyond the edge of my sight. The icy cold spots in the house became more frequent, often accompanied by the faint, sweet smell of lavender, a scent I vaguely remembered from my grandmother's old house, but which felt out of place here. I started barricading myself in the living room, piling up cushions against the door, trying to block out the sounds and the growing sense of unease. One particularly unsettling night, I was checking on Lily, who was sound asleep. As I tucked her in, I heard a distinct, soft gasp from the foot of her bed. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but Lily's stuffed animals. But a chill, so profound it felt like a physical touch washed over me, and I distinctly heard a child's whisper right beside my ear, "She's ours now." I was downstairs, trying to calm my racing heart, when I heard Lily's bedroom door creak open, followed by the soft padding of bare feet on the wooden floor, coming down the stairs. I knew she was supposed to be fast asleep. "Lily," I called out tentatively, my voice barely a whisper. There was no reply, just the continuing footsteps, slow and deliberate, reaching the bottom of the stairs, then heading directly towards the playroom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew, with sickening certainty, that it wasn't Lily. The whispers from the playroom intensified, growing into a frantic, joyful cacophony of children's voices. Then, Lily's actual voice, small and terrified, cried out from upstairs, "Sarah, help me. They're pulling my hair." My blood ran cold. Whatever was moving towards the playroom, it wasn't Lily, and Lily was in danger. I grabbed the heaviest fireplace poker, my hands trembling, and raced up the stairs. I burst into Lily's room, my eyes frantically searching the darkness. Lily was cowering in her bed, tears streaming down her face, pointing a shaking finger at the empty space at the foot of her bed. "The tall man," she sobbed. The icy cold spot was there, more intense than ever, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. But before I could fully comprehend, a new sound erupted from downstairs, a guttural growl that reverberated through the very foundations of the house, followed by the sickening crunch of breaking porcelain, the antique doll. I snatched Lily from her bed, wrapping her in a blanket, and raced down the stairs. The growl intensifying, filling the house with a palpable threat. I didn't stop to look at the playroom, didn't stop to see what might be waiting for me. I burst out the front door into the cool night air, Lily screaming in my arms, and ran down the driveway, not looking back. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, and sped away, leaving the silent, darkened house and its unseen occupants behind. I never babysat for the Millers again, never even drove down that street. Now, whenever I hear the faint sound of children's laughter, when no children are around, or the unexpected creak of a floorboard in an empty house, I'm reminded of the night I was truly alone, at work, and the other children came to play. The new family seemed perfectly normal, their baby Liam, a cherubic bundle of joy. But on my first night babysitting, the baby monitor started picking up more than just his cries. It picked up a second voice, whispering from his nursery. A voice that definitely wasn't mine or the baby's. My name is Chloe, and I was a 20-year-old college student in Boston, Massachusetts, trying to make extra cash babysitting. I loved kids, and the work was usually straightforward. This particular job was for the Davies, a young couple who had recently moved into a charming brownstone in a quiet, historic neighborhood. Their baby, Liam, was 6 months old, a sweet, gurgling infant who rarely cried. The Davies were friendly, giving me a quick tour of their beautifully decorated home hardwood floors, antique furniture, and a nursery painted in soft blues and yellows. Mrs. Davies had shown me the baby monitor, a modern digital model, assuring me Liam was a good sleeper. I took it all in stride, a seasoned pro. I was practical, analytical, more concerned with my studies than with superstitions. This was just another night, another easy shift with a sleeping baby. The first hint of something wrong was the baby monitor itself. After the Davies left, I settled into the living room, the monitor displaying a clear, albeit dark, image of Liam's crib. He was sound asleep, but then, a faint, almost imperceptible static began to hiss from the monitor's speaker. Like a distant radio tuned to an empty frequency. It was odd for a digital monitor, but I dismissed it as interference from the old building. Then, During one of Liam's peaceful stretches, I heard it, a low, melodic humming, like a lullaby, coming distinctly from the monitor's speaker. It wasn't Liam. He was asleep. It sounded like a woman's voice, soft and mournful, singing to him. My heart gave a little lurch. I checked the monitor's display. The nursery was empty, save for Liam in his crib. I turned up the volume on the monitor, but the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by the faint static. I assumed it was some kind of radio bleed-through from a nearby apartment. But then, a few minutes later, as I glanced at the monitor, I saw a fleeting shadow pass quickly across Liam's crib. Too fast to properly register. A dark smear against the pale yellow wall. It was gone in an instant. The rising action was a terrifying escalation of the unseen presence. The humming became more frequent, always coming from the monitor when Liam was asleep or silent. Always a mournful, old-fashioned tune. Sometimes, it was accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap, like fingers tapping gently on wood, coming from the nursery's speaker. I started getting up to check on Liam whenever I heard it, convinced someone had snuck into the house. But each time, the nursery was empty, Liam was sound asleep, and the tapping and humming would cease the moment I opened his door. The shadows intensified. I'd catch glimpses of movement on the monitora, fleeting shape at the edge of the crib, a dark form hovering just above Liam for a split second, then vanishing. The house itself started to feel cold, despite the heating being on, with inexplicable drafts that raised goosebumps on my arms. One night, as I was watching a movie, the monitor's static suddenly intensified, becoming a crackling roar. Through the static, a clear, guttural whisper emerged, directed not at Liam, but at me, drawn out and filled with a chilling malice. My blood ran cold. I stared at the monitor, my breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. Then, the static cleared, and I heard Liam's small, innocent gurgle, followed by the soft, mournful humming. This wasn't interference. This was intelligent. I started barricading the nursery door from the outside whenever I left the room, piling furniture in front of it, desperate to keep whatever was in there. In there, my sleep was filled with nightmares of shadowy figures leaning over my bed, their whispers filling my ears. The beautiful brownstone, once charming, now felt like a cage, and I, the babysitter, was trapped with something that wanted me gone. I was in the living room, staring at the monitor, watching Liam sleep. The humming was playing, a sweet, melancholic tune, and the tapping was soft, rhythmic, coming from the nursery. Then, I saw it. On the monitor, a dark, elongated shadow slowly began to coalesce at the foot of Liam's crib. It was tall, impossibly thin, its form vaguely humanoid, but featureless, like a living void. It slowly reached out a long, slender arm towards Liam, its fingers impossibly long and spindly. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and the tapping became frantic, almost desperate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a terrifying drumbeat in my ears. I knew I had to act. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a brass fireplace poker, and sprinted towards the nursery, ignoring the terrified screams that seemed to erupt from the monitor's speaker. Now, distorted into a monstrous shriek, I burst into the nursery, flicking on the light. The room was empty. Liam was sound asleep in his crib, oblivious, but the air was impossibly cold, and a faint, sweet smell, like old perfume, hung heavy in the room. As I stood there, panting, my eyes frantically searching the empty room, the baby monitor, which I had left on the living room table, let out a single, triumphant, high-pitched giggle. It was Liam's giggle, but it was coming from the monitor, from the living room, not from the crib. And then, from the monitor, from my living room, I heard it again, the low, mournful humming, and a voice, distinctly female and chillingly close, whispering, "He's ours now." I didn't hesitate. I snatched Liam from his crib, clutching him tightly, and fled the house, leaving the monitors screaming with static and the sound of that terrible, victorious giggle. I ran down the street, Liam crying softly in my arms, not looking back at the darkened brownstone. I called the Davies from a payphone at a gas station, incoherently telling them I had an emergency and couldn't babysit anymore, that I had Liam with me. They were confused, angry, but I didn't care. I dropped Liam off at a neighbor's house and never returned to that neighborhood, never babysat again. Now, whenever I hear the faint sound of a baby's cry or the unexpected hum of a forgotten tune, I'm reminded of the night I was truly alone, at work, and the other mother came home for her child. The couple was oddly insistent about their daughter's sleep schedule and the locked attic door, but it wasn't the silence of the house that unsettled me. It was the faint scratching that began coming from inside that locked attic, always just after the little girl was tucked into bed. My name is Jessica, and I was a 22-year-old art history student in a charming, historic town near Salem, Massachusetts, looking for babysitting gigs to help with my tuition. I'd grown up in old houses, so I was used to their quirks and creaks. This job was for the Thorne family, a young couple with a 6-year-old daughter named Clara. They lived in a beautiful, sprawling colonial home on a tree-lined street, the kind of house with deep historical roots. Clara was a quiet, observant child, often found playing alone with her collection of antique dolls. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne were a little peculiar, overly meticulous about Clara's bedtime, and explicitly warned me not to go near the attic door, which was always kept locked at the end of the main hallway. Just storage, Mr. Thorne had said, his eyes a little too intense. I shrugged it off. Everyone has their secrets, and old houses certainly do. I was a rational person, a student of history, not prone to believing in ghosts, but I did appreciate a good mystery. This was just another night, another child to watch, another few dollars earned. The first hint of something wrong was the doll. After Clara was asleep, tucked into her canopy bed, I went downstairs. That's when I noticed one of her antique dolls, a porcelain figure with a meticulously painted smile and vacant blue eyes, sitting on the bottom step of the main staircase, facing the locked attic door. I was certain Clara had taken all her dolls to bed with her. I picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy and cold to the touch. I placed it back in Clara's room, propped against her pillow. But then, as I returned downstairs, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible scratching, coming from inside the locked attic door. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like fingernails dragging across rough wood. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing, just the hum of the old refrigerator and the wind whistling through a drafty window. I dismissed it as mice, or the house settling. But then, as I was watching TV in the living room, I heard a distinct thump from the floor directly above me, the attic. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped. My heart gave a little lurch. The rising action was a slow, terrifying escalation of the hidden presence. The scratching from the attic became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by a soft, mournful sigh that seemed to echo down the hallway. It sounded less like mice and more like something trying to get out. Each time I'd cautiously approach the attic door, pressing my ear against the cool wood, but the sounds would cut off the moment I got close, only to resume once I retreated. The antique doll reappeared multiple times, always in different, unsettling locations. On the kitchen counter, perched on the top of the bookshelf, and once, staring at me from the hallway mirror. Each time, its vacant blue eyes seemed to follow me, and it felt colder, heavier than before. Clara, during a late-night bathroom trip, mumbled sleepily. The woman in the attic doesn't like her dolls, moved. My blood ran cold. I knew the Thornes didn't have anyone else living with them, let alone an attic tenant. The house grew colder too, with certain spots radiating an icy chill, especially near the attic door in Clara's bedroom. I started to notice small, intricate drawings appearing on Clara's bedside table, drawn on loose sheets of paper. They depicted a gaunt, shadowy woman with long, flowing hair, standing at the top of a staircase, looking down at a small figure below. The style was distinctly Clara's, but the subject matter was profoundly unsettling. My sleep was fractured by nightmares of being trapped in a dark, dusty room, listening to endless scratching. The locked attic door became a focal point of dread, a constant, silent threat at the end of the hall. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the rain lashed against the house. I was downstairs, trying to block out the now constant, frantic scratching and the low guttural moans coming from the attic. The attic door, which had always been securely locked, began to rattle violently, the old wood groaning under an unseen force. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call for help, but there was no signal, the storm having cut off communication. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then, I heard a child's small, clear voice, singing a nursery rhyme, coming from inside the attic. A voice that was not Clara's, "Rock-a-bye baby," on the treetop, slow and unnerving. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the sounds were not mice, not drafts, and not just the house settling. Something was truly trapped in that attic, and it was alive, desperate, and growing stronger. The scratching intensified, becoming a furious clawing, and the attic door started to visibly splinter, tiny slivers of wood raining onto the hallway floor. Then, from beneath the door, a thin, pale, impossibly long finger slowly began to snake its way out, blindly probing the floor, twitching and beckoning. I didn't wait. I didn't scream. I just reacted. I snatched Clara from her bed, wrapping her in a blanket, and bolted out of her room, past the terrifying, splintering attic door, down the stairs, and out of the house. I ran down the street, Clara whimpering softly in my arms, not looking back at the dark, old colonial and its hidden horrors. I pounded on the nearest neighbor's door, incoherent with terror, until they let me in. I never babysat for the Thorns again, never even drove down that street. The house eventually sold, but I heard whispers that no one stayed long. Even now, when I hear a distant scratching or the faint, tinny melody of a music box, I'm reminded of that locked door, and the things that waited, scratching, to be let out.